It's always on your mind. Anytime I get to represent our country, it means a lot to me. So for me personally, I'm always thinking about trying to make every team. And obviously being a part of LIV where we don't get points is uphill battle.
Patrick Reed just dropped an announcement that sent a shockwave through the entire golf world. One win in Dallas wasn't the whole story. It triggered something bigger. And the reaction that followed? It might change everything for LIV Golf and for Reed himself. And today, I'll walk you through the moment everyone is now talking about. Announcement shockwave. The scene in Dallas had unfolded with the kind of dramatic texture Patrick Reed always secretly seemed to attract. He had walked into the mixed zone with the aura of a man carrying not only a putter, but a narrative ready to detonate. Observers noted how the playoff triumph, a tense, gritty, hold-your-breath sprint of four men trading survival blows, created the perfect stage for Reed to redirect the spotlight. Once he held the title, he allowed the victory to serve as proof that his game had regained relevance, that the short-game firepower he once weaponized on the biggest stages had just resurfaced on home state soil.
You win your first LIV Golf title in your 41st start out here, and your first pro win in your home state of Texas. What kind of emotions are you feeling right now?
I don't like hearing those numbers. It took me 41 times just to win out here.
Commentators had described the way he framed his message. A mix of defiance and unexpected softness, a cocktail that felt intentionally brewed. He emphasized that the win symbolized more than form. It represented renewed legitimacy, something he wanted decision-makers to notice. Analysts noted that he positioned his Ryder Cup ambitions as a patriotic appeal rather than a personal demand, invoking past matches where his clutch performances had tilted momentum. Then, without warning, he layered in family references, gratitude toward his wife, nods to his kids, an emotional overtone that softened his public persona at the exact moment he needed warmth to counter years of polarizing headlines. What really shook the room was the understanding that he wasn't merely offering a statement of hope. He was executing a public relations maneuver disguised as competitive ambition. Insiders pointed out how the rules governing LIV players' Ryder Cup eligibility created a brutal mathematical climb. Only major finishes counted for points, meaning Reed effectively needed miracle-level results in the remaining majors, or a rare discretionary pick. But that impossibility only heightened the drama. The announcement spread quickly through feeds, talk shows, and pundit clips, each framing it as the opening shot in a months-long political campaign. Some argued that he had chosen this exact moment, right after a televised playoff victory, because he knew narrative momentum mattered as much as stats. Others speculated that the emotional framing was a tactical plea meant to influence captains, media, and even betting markets. In one swoop, Reed had turned a routine winner's presser into a referendum on his reputation, his relevance, and his Ryder Cup dream. The shockwave was immediate, and it was exactly what he wanted. Season resurgence. Patrick Reed's Dallas surge didn't materialize out of thin air. The season leading up to it had been steadily tightening around him like a narrative coil waiting to snap. Analysts observing his year noted how his 2025 performance arc had been quietly building, one small statistical resurrection at a time. He had posted top 10 finishes, climbed the individual standings, and rebuilt the core identity that once defined him. An elite short-game technician who turned chaos into birdies and pressure into fuel. His resurgence wasn't flashy, but it was undeniable, and observers had pointed out how his scrambling numbers and revived putting touch suggested that the old Reed was slowly resurfacing.
Patrick Reed. He's never led a
LIV's season coverage repeatedly highlighted how he hovered around top-tier form through mid-year, ranking as high as 4th in the season standings. Those markers provided the credibility he needed. Without them, the Ryder Cup declaration would have sounded like a fantasy. Commentators examining his strokes gained data noted that his around-the-green performance had returned to near-elite status, a fine margin that often separated him from the field in tense final rounds. His putting, which had dipped earlier in the season, had stabilized enough to produce that crucial 16-foot playoff dagger in Dallas. A moment that perfectly illustrated how statistical improvement becomes narrative ammunition. Adding another layer, Reed had adjusted mentally to the LIV format in a way many players struggled to do. He recognized the sprint-like cadence of LIV weeks, where preparation had to ignite instantly rather than build slowly. He used the longer breaks between events to tighten routines, recalibrate his confidence, and arrive at tournaments sharper than before. His camp repeatedly suggested that this change in rhythm had rebuilt his mental toughness, giving him the ability to shift from off weeks to elite competition in seconds, not days. Observers in Texas also noted that a home state win brought intangible benefits: renewed local fan support, sympathetic press angles, and an aura of belonging that hadn't always been granted to him. That goodwill amplified his Ryder Cup campaign, turning a personal competitive milestone into a broader public narrative. Reed wasn't merely winning again, he was becoming relevant again. And relevance is a currency he understood better than most: Ryder calculus. If the announcement provided the fireworks, the Ryder Cup math delivered the cold water reality. Analysts immediately dissected the logistics, pointing out that Reed's emotional pitch clashed with an unforgiving point system. Since LIV players could only earn U.S. Ryder Cup points in major championships, Reed's standing, hovering in the mid-30s range in the points table, left him far from automatic qualification. That meant his actual path involved two improbable routes: either a heroic major performance surge or a captain's discretionary pick dependent on optics, politics, and team chemistry as much as performance.
Oh, 30. I mean, I barely hit it, Cass. Okay. All right.
Observers familiar with U.S. selection history noted the volatile politics surrounding LIV players. Some captains leaned toward loyalty to the PGA Tour ecosystem. Others were more pragmatic, allowing pure form to dictate choices. Reed's history carried both benefits and burdens. On one side sat his impressive Ryder Cup resume: 7 wins in 12 matches, a reputation as a fierce singles competitor, and a history of swinging momentum in high-pressure moments. On the other sat years of controversy, public friction, and polarizing incidents that made his name a magnet for debate. That dual identity meant a captain selecting him would inevitably face scrutiny. Insiders speculated that Reed's team understood this, which explained the timing and framing of his Dallas plea. His emotional tone, his family-centered narrative, and the aura of redemption around the win all aligned with an attempt to soften public perception. Analysts pointed out that he had been strategically entering events known to showcase match play suitability, hoping to leave captains with recent relevant footage demonstrating resilience, grit, and the ability to outlast opponents. Observers noted a more subtle tactic too. Reed's social feeds and media appearances had started focusing on mentorship, team engagement, and father figure imagery, visuals that eased the tension surrounding his past controversies. Pundits argued that this shift wasn't accidental. It was a coordinated campaign to make the optics of selecting him less combustible. The Ryder Cup conversation around Reed now existed in two parallel dimensions: the cold arithmetic of points and the warm theatrics of perception. And in that clash, his Dallas announcement became not just a bid for selection, but a strategic trigger meant to apply pressure on captains and shape the narrative leading into the final decision. Aces alchemy. Inside the Four Aces camp, Patrick Reed's Dallas victory wasn't treated as a solitary triumph, but as a team-wide ignition, the kind of spark that reinforced why LIV's squad format had become fertile ground for his personality. Observers following the team noted how Reed had evolved from a lone wolf competitor into a structured contributor within a locker room defined by ritual, micro-strategy, and carefully curated chemistry. Analysts pointed out how the Four Aces built their identity around intense practice blocks, data-driven prep, and closed-door tactical sessions that mirrored the seriousness of elite soccer or Formula One operations. Reed thrived in that environment, slipping into a hybrid role: emotional accelerator on the course, stabilizer behind the scenes.
For Patrick Reed, last week on Golf Central, I was on with Rex Hoggard, and he was my analyst. I was hosting, and our producer said to us, well, as a segment, we're going to assume that the top 6 and the U.S. Ryder Cup points lock down, and then you have to pick the other 6. And I picked Patrick Reed.
Insiders revealed that the team employed a rotating Captain's Council, a small committee of senior players who met with coaches to determine weekly pin strategies, lineup sequencing, and risk-reward profiles. When Reed's form surged, he often became part of that council, influencing decisions that impacted not only individual leaderboard results, but the team's overall scoring structure. This insider influence showcased his ability to toggle between personal ambition and group responsibility, something critics once doubted he could manage. Observers remarked that when he pushed for aggression, his teammates listened. When he advocated caution, they considered it. That trust didn't appear overnight. It was built over months of incremental collaboration. The Four Aces media presence added another layer. Their social team crafted behind-the-scenes content portraying Reed as both mentor and comic relief, often positioning him in captain for a day bits or locker room challenge segments. Analysts suggested these skits served dual purposes. They entertained fans and reframed Reed's public image from high-conflict independent to supportive team cornerstone. In a league where branding mattered as much as birdies, that shift became valuable currency. Observers of the Dallas aftermath noted how teammates rallied around Reed during the celebrations, emphasizing unity and mutual investment. That optics-heavy display aligned perfectly with the broader narrative Reed had been pushing. He wasn't just a streaky competitor trying to force his way into Ryder Cup conversation. He was a stable, system-integrated team figure whose chemistry credentials were improving at the exact moment they mattered most. In the alchemy of the Four Aces, Reed had found a formula that fortified his present and strengthened his long-term ambition. Image reconstruction. Around Reed, a quieter but equally calculated campaign had been unfolding off the course. Analysts paying close attention to his public presentation noted how he and his team had spent the past year systematically reshaping the emotional tone of his image. Instead of leaning into defiance, a trait that once defined his competitive persona, he pivoted toward warmth, family, and community, crafting an aura of grounded maturity rather than theatrical controversy. Observers pointed out how local Texas outlets carried soft-focus features of him embracing his kids, meeting young golfers at clinics, or participating in charity events, all timed in a way that framed him as both athlete and neighbor. PR specialists suggested that these community-centered moments weren't accidental. They were deliberate buffers designed to counter years of polarization. Reed's team shifted sponsor engagements toward grassroots activations, youth clinics, small-town pro-am events, local charity tie-ins. These moments rarely made national headlines, but quietly built positive sentiment in media ecosystems that often held long memories. Analysts argued that these micro-perceptions mattered, especially for a player making a case for a Ryder Cup pick where chemistry, leadership optics, and fan reactions factored into decision-making. Observers also noticed a strategic rhythm to his content releases. Emotional clips featuring family moments or behind-the-scenes team interactions often dropped during windows when pundits debated his Ryder Cup viability. Media analysts interpreted this as a calculated attempt to control the narrative atmosphere, ensuring that while commentators rehashed old disputes, his feeds presented evidence of growth, humility, and team-first behavior. In modern sports storytelling, perception management was just as important as performance metrics. Reed's camp appeared fluent in that language. This image rehabilitation didn't erase his history, but it reframed it. Rather than being discussed as a divisive figure, he increasingly appeared in conversations as a reclaimed competitor, seeking redemption through performance and responsibility. Observers pointed out the striking contrast between the old Reed versus the world frame and the new Reed for his family, his team, and maybe his country arc. It wasn't subtle, but it was effective, and Dallas provided the emotional climax that stitched the storyline together. In this reconstruction, Reed wasn't rewriting his identity, he was upgrading it to fit the demands of a political golf era. Market whiplash. The ripple effects of Reed's Dallas statement didn't stop at team rooms or social feeds. They surged into betting markets and tournament scheduling projections, creating the kind of financial and narrative turbulence only a polarizing figure could trigger. Analysts watching the odds movement noted that sportsbooks reacted within hours of Reed's announcement, trimming his long-shot Ryder Cup pick prices and adjusting his futures odds in LIV events. Sharp bettors interpreted the Dallas win not as a one-off spike, but as a signal that Reed's ceiling had risen again, prompting speculative wagers on upcoming tournaments where short-game specialists traditionally thrived.
Is in his hands. Oh, Captain America is a merry-do marvel!
Market experts explained how public sentiment often influenced early week line movement. Since Reed's narrative now bristled with momentum, playoff heroics, patriotic aspiration, emotional framing, bookmakers had to account for surges in recreational betting volume. While his actual statistical probability of being chosen for the Ryder Cup remained slim, the perception of possibility alone created financial shifts. Observers noted how narrative-driven moves like these often snowballed into media segments, which then fed the cycle by amplifying pressure on captains and decision-makers. It was a feedback loop Reed had set into motion knowingly or not. On the scheduling side, analysts reported that Reed's camp had already begun mapping a tournament calendar aimed at maximizing Ryder Cup visibility. With LIV events limited in their ability to produce official points, the remaining majors became critical battlegrounds. Insiders suggested that Reed intended to prioritize courses that rewarded short-game control and mid-iron precision, strengths that historically elevated his chances in high-pressure environments. His team appeared focused on curating a season run that highlighted his consistency rather than relying on streaky bursts. Observers also noticed a subtle but significant tactic, circulating curated highlight reels to media and decision-makers that showcased Reed's past Ryder Cup heroics and clutch shot-making. These compilations resurfaced at convenient moments, often preceding pundit debates or selection commentary. Analysts interpreted these drops as strategic narrative engineering, a way to create the illusion of momentum even when the mathematical path remained narrow. In the end, the markets didn't shift because Reed became a guaranteed Ryder Cup pick. They shifted because he became a story again. And in sports where perception could sculpt probability, that story carried real weight: financial, political, and emotional. Patrick Reed didn't just win in Dallas. He recalibrated the entire conversation around his season, his reputation, and his Ryder Cup ambitions. Whether the gamble succeeds or collapses, he has already forced the golf world to react, recalculate, and re-engage. The storyline is moving, and he's steering it. And I have only one request to you. Please subscribe to this channel and don't forget to comment down below. See you soon.